Okay, the new benefit statement has arrived, and going to have a look at what is being shown because it's a lot different to the ones we've looked at before. This is the new remediable service statement for those people who have transitional protection, and a bit at the end for the differences for those who do not have transitional protection, because it includes a couple of extra things that are missing from the one that everybody's getting if they've got transitional protection. So this is my page when I log in, and the first point of potential confusion is this active designation. The TPS consider me an active member because I have yet to take my pension. Once you've taken your pension, you then get this page. This page then indicates that you are a retired member. So you can be an active member or you can be a retired member. This causes some confusion because the term active has another meaning relating to when you apply for the pension. If you take the pension immediately after you leave teaching, then that is termed an active application, and you get a slightly better reduction rate on the career average part of the pension than you do if you leave teaching and then apply, because that then is a deferred application. So it's possible to be an active or retired member, but if you're an active member, you can then have an active application or a deferred application. Apparently, this doesn't cause any confusion at all. So what we're going to look at is the remedial service statement. This is the benefit statement shown on the top left link. So if I click on that and go and look at what that means, we come to the second point of potential confusion here, and it's the service history. Now, I did just under 28 years, and this part of the page shows all of my service, and it's clean, all of my service. Doesn't matter if it's in the final salary or in the career average. This is the total of both parts of your service. So it will add up whatever you had in final salary and add to that whatever you've added in the career average. Later on, we're going to see that total broken down into the different parts for the different schemes. And if you have transitional protection, this is the point where the 7 years in that 2015 to 22 period can be shifted from one scheme into the other, which is why there are two options. So now on to the actual service statement itself. If you click on it, it takes you to this page that explains a lot about what we will see, a lot of that important information, but most of us know that already, and we just want to see the figure. So I'm going to take you to show you my slide by clicking on the view your current statement. In the past, I have always preferred looking at the PDF version of the statement. And if you're someone who prefers a paper copy, to print out and scribble on and make your notes on, then this is where you should get it. You should download that and then you can print it off. Now, however, I think it is weaker than the online version because it's got some poor formatting. The text isn't always clear. Sometimes bits are cut off on the join of pages, and it is missing some detail. So I'm going to scroll down and focus on the online version of the statement instead. And we come to the headline figures for the two option choices that we're most interested in, how much we will get from the pension. And this is where we need to start being very careful in how we read these figures. Just looking at the headline figures, it appears that option 2 is much better than option 1. The pension is £700 a year better, though the lump sum is £6,000 less, of course. But in making comparisons here, we do need to be sure that we are doing a like-for-like comparison. And that means checking on the dates for each part of the pension. The headline figures do not tell the whole story. The final salary parts, I've circled here, they've got the same date. And so those parts will be paid at the same time. If I take this at 60, and there's about a £2,000 difference. Under this option, option 1 would be paying me £2,000 a year more for a number of years. That is until I hit the second date, if I went for option 2, at which point then I'm going to start getting a total of £700 a year more. So I might have 7 years of £2,000 a year less, followed by then the rest of my life with £700 more a year more if I went with option 2. So that's not quite the same picture, the same story we're getting. Now, there is no way, I'm afraid, at least not as I can see it, that the pension scheme could have done anything different about how they present these figures. But we do need to be aware of the impact of the different dates. To help with this, I have produced a spreadsheet that will allow us to compare the amounts we would get if we took them at the same age, at a set age. And in this case, I've entered the figures in the sheet and set the retirement age, it's 55 years and 6 months. And this now comes up with a like-for-like basis, taking the pensions at the same age. And for me, I think this tells us a little bit more about the relative value. And what I see here is that option 1 is better. I'm going to get £5.50, wow, £5.50 more a year under option 1, and I'm still getting £5,000 extra as the lump sum. Reduced, of course, because I am taking it early. But that's the key thing. It's no longer that £700 difference the other way because of this difference in the ages, those extra 7 years. Well, that's the top part of this section dealt with. So on to the bottom half and the family benefits. If I zoom in on these, if you're still actively paying into the pension scheme, then the death grant is 3 times your salary. Now, I'm not actively paying in, and so what I've got here is my death grant is simply my automatic lump sum. The annual family benefit amount is the amount that will be paid to a partner as a pension if they live longer than you. Now, if the amount of service shown here is lower than you expect, that may be because you're not married or in a civil partnership. If you're not married or in a civil partnership, then any service from before 2007 is disregarded. As soon as you get married or you enter a civil partnership, that service gets put back into the family benefits. I'm not a financial advisor and I'm not a marriage guidance counsellor either. But if you want to protect your partner and you're not married or in a civil partnership, that is certainly something worth looking at, because as soon as you do, you get to use all of your service pre-2007 as well. So now going down a bit further down the statement page, look at the next bit. Here you can find more detail about how each part of the pension is made up by looking at the summary of the benefits. Now this has 2, possibly 3 sections, depending on when you started in the scheme, what kind of breaks you've had in the scheme. I only have 2, so if I open that up, I only get the 2. Well, this is the most common arrangement. Most people have 1 part in the final salary and 1 part in the career average, and each can be opened up to give you more detail. So this is the detail for the 80th scheme, and it tells you what the normal pension age. At the top, if I zoom in on that. So here it tells me my normal pension age is 60. If you're on the 60th pension scheme, you started after 2006, that would be 65 and not 60. And now we come to the next part, which can cause some confusion. That is the naming of the options. One is named final salary and one is named career average. And yet what we're looking at here is the benefits in the final salary service. And this is because anybody who's got transitional protection will have some service in the final salary scheme, and they will have some service in the career average scheme. And you get to choose. And there's this point where if you choose, then you'll have more years in the final salary part and less years in the career average part. That difference, because I left in 2017, my difference is only around 2 years. But for many, that difference is going to be the full 7 years, because it's the whole difference in the remedy period. You're not going to lose those years if you go with option 2. I've got here 2 years less in option 2. It simply means that those years are going to be pushed into the career average scheme, which we will see later when we look at the next section. The next section is the annual pension and average lump sums. This has the annual pension, how much you would get from each if you took them at the normal pension age, just for the final salary. And this is the same as we saw on the previous page. It has the automatic lump sum and how much extra optional lump sum we could get if we gave up the maximum amount of pension, and therefore what the pension would be reduced by or reduced to if we did that. The next little section looks at the average salary. And a key point here is the date, the best average salary period. Mine goes back to 2007 because I left in 2017, and that's within the 10 years of when I left. And a lot of teachers wonder why it goes back so far when they're being paid more now than they have ever been paid. And it's all related to inflation. So mine go back to 2007 because in 2007, I was on the same pay scale, but when you add on inflation, that was far better than the same pay scale I had when I was in 2017. And the reason here is that, yes, my pay was gone. This is a UPS 3 example for the last 10 years, from 2014 to 2024, actually. And you can see that the pay has been up. The blue line shows the actual amount of pay, and that has always been going up and up and up and up. It never goes down. But that's not the number that is used in calculating the final average. All of those blue salaries have inflation added to them, and that is what gives us this red line. And this red line shows you actually in 2024 the UPS 3 salary was the lowest it had been in the last 10 years, taking into account inflation. And if I wanted to keep hold of those best salaries, the ones that are in 2015, if they're about to drop off, then you need to be looking at my video called The Pay Plateau, because that shows you a method of protecting those old salaries. Certainly worth a look if your best salaries are in 2015 or 2016 and you're about to be lost. The restricted salary here, I've got no. The restricted used salary is there for teachers who've had large increases in their pay in the final years of their careers. It would be unfair for a teacher to suddenly double their pay in the last year and that to double their pension. So there are limits placed on sudden final salary increases in the last years or so. I've got a video on that. Take a look at that one if you think you've got yes there. Because if you've exceeded the limit, it will say yes there, and you then can think about whether or not you want to take the pension now, while your salary, as that restriction unwinds, might give you a better pension in the future. The bottom part of this section shows the service and calculation dates. The teacher service are the amounts used for each option, and you can see here, this is where I've got the 2-year difference still. 27 years under option 1, those 2 years that have been moved into the career average if I go with option 2. The salary of reference is only relevant if you're taking the pension at 60 or after 60, after reaching the normal pension age. 60 in my case, 65 if you started after 2007. And then returning to work. It limits how much the pension is allowed to add on top of your salaries. And this salary of reference comes in 2 parts. There is the pound figure and the date. And that's important because the limit is worked out by adding inflation each April. And so the limit will go up. But there's this starting point. There's this reference point from where inflation is measured from. So in my case here, my salary of $42,648 is based on it being paid in April 2008. So I will add inflation from 2008. The TPS have a calculator where you can plug in these figures, and that gives me then the limit for the current financial year. So £42,500 back in 2008 doesn't sound like a great deal if I'm going back to work now, but I get to add inflation before I work out what my limit is. And my limit this year would be 67,700. So I know a lot of people get worried about how low the salary of reference figure looks, but you get to add inflation to it each year. So it goes up every year. Now to the other part of the pension, the career average part. On this, now this is a much simpler set of figures because it's simply an amount of money that we paid out if you take it at the normal pension age. There are the same choices regarding giving up some of the pension to get that larger lump sum, but there is no average salary. We don't need an average salary for this one. The career average pension is a much simpler. And we now see a reversal of the amounts of service being used. Those 2 years here have been moved out of my final salary. So if I go for the final salary, there will be no career average. And those 2 years then put into option 2, and I can see them there. The amount of service, though, actually is pretty irrelevant. That number of years is irrelevant because it doesn't use that in the calculation of your pension. But it can be there to reassure you that you've got the right total amount of service if you add those together with the one on the previous page. And does that come to the total you had at the start on the very first dashboard page? The next section of the statement is the section on family benefits. This is the amount your partner will receive as their pension if they outlive you. The figures are generally in the same ballpark, but I will draw your attention to this part at the bottom of the section. If you're not married or in a civil partnership, the sentence misses out that last bit about the civil partnership. If you're not married or in a civil partnership, then only service since 2007 gets counted in working out how much your partner will get if you die before them. I was in a head teachers conference last month where two heads with virtually identical service and pretty much identical pensions, one of them had a family service benefit of 15,000 and the other one had a family benefit of 30,000, double. Yet they had virtually identical careers, identical pensions. And it turns out that simply one of them was married and one of them was not. They'd been working since 1990, and so one of them had 17 years from 1990 to 2007. That had been completely disregarded, ignored, and that led to them getting their partner getting half the pension they would do if they died before their partner. They were on the phone by the end of the conference talking to their partner and arranging the wedding. The very last section I'm going to look at today, though not the last bit of this presentation, relates to the service history. This details all the records held by TPS on your service history, and it's very important that you check it is both correct and complete. The calculations of your pension will always be wrong if this data is wrong. Computer scientists have a sentence or a saying in regard to this. It's called garbage in, garbage out. If you put in nonsense, I'm afraid you're going to get nonsense out. There is another section on the website that shows the same data, and it's called the employment history. And you can simply copy that out and put it into a spreadsheet. I've got another video on that. Something that I think makes finding problems that little bit easier to do. Can you find the gaps and can you find where salaries bounce up and down like yours? I've got a whole other video that shows how to do that. If you do find any mistakes, then you need to go back to the employer and ask them to correct them. And a big tip here, never, ever throw your pay slips away. They may be the only evidence you have to prove the truth with regard to your pay and pension contributions. Employers only got to keep records going back 7 years. And so if they find a mistake, it's going to be down to you to prove to them that they made that mistake and that they need to correct it. Now, there are some differences in the statement if you do not have transitional protection. So I'm going to look quickly at what other parts appear on the statements for those who do not have transitional protection. And I think these parts are something that we really should be pushing to have included on the statements anyway, because I think they're very valuable. For those who do not have transitional protection, you do get this page that shows you methods A and method B, the calculation for what is going to be used for your best average salary. It's been removed from the RSS for those who have transitional protection. And I think it's quite useful to have both together so you can make that comparison, see how close they are, whether or not method B is going to be overtaken by method A, etc. The second thing that has been lost is this table of the last 10 years' salaries with their revaluations and where they have been tagged with the method. This table, I think, is a much greater loss to those with final salary service because it makes it easier to look at these numbers and say, what is the impact of me losing those better salaries? If they're at the bottom and they're 60,000, I'm going to be replacing them with a 40,000 one that's more recent. That could be making a significant difference to my final average. And at that point, you may be looking to take a month out or having a break to protect that. For example, here we've got a salary at the bottom, which is going to be where the older ones are going to be at 45,000, about to be replaced by one that's under 39,000. However, that's an argument for another day, and that's the end of this presentation on the benefit statement. So that is your benefit statement, and what I think the key points you need to look out for are to download and save the statement itself, that you can copy the employment data and put it into a spreadsheet, and never throw your pay slips away.